Welcome to the Commonwealth Club. I'm George Hammond, Chairman of the Humanities Forum, which organized tonight's event. I'd like to welcome our online audiences and all of those who are watching in other countries to enjoy our online programs at the Commonwealth Club. We have done over 300 since March when the COVID crisis began. And today we have a special direct from Tokyo experience where we're going to talk to Shin Ushijima, a top lawyer there. Let me tell you a little bit about him. He started his legal career as a public prosecutor, then started his own law firm 35 years ago, has built it into one of the premier law firms in Tokyo. I said San Francisco, no, in Tokyo. And he is also on the board of directors of Nippon Life Insurance, and he is the president of an organization, a nonprofit for Japan's corporate governance structures. And we're going to talk to him in addition to that legal and business background that he has, because he's also a best-selling author and novelist in Tokyo and Japan. And he has not only 8 or more novels, but also a large number of legal books that sell. You can see the shelf behind him is just his own books, the books that he's created. So I thought we would get the view from Tokyo about the experiences that are going on, that we have a worldwide pandemic. We have a lot of other things going on in the world, in politics. And the Commonwealth Club has this great advantage now with the virtual programs that we can talk to anyone anywhere in the world and get their points of view to our American audience. So that's what we're doing tonight. And I'm really proud to introduce Shin Ushijima, the lawyer that I just described, and the best-selling author. Shin, thank you very much for joining us from Tokyo. I feel like I'm speaking to the future because it's already Friday morning in Tokyo, and we're still left back on Thursday in the United States.
Thank you very much, George. First of all, thank you very much for the invitation, and it's my pleasure that I have a chance to speak to you and be listened to by the audience. Thank you very much.
So let's start with one of your novels, and we'll come back to your writing later after we discuss other major topics. But you have many books in Japanese, and the first one that was translated, it was a bestseller in Japan. The first one that was translated into English was The Shareholders Meeting. And that you had a very interesting idea for that story. You want to tell a little bit about the story and how you came up with the idea for the novel?
Yes, thank you very much. The first thing is I should start with why did I write a novel at the age of 47? And okay. That is because I thought that I've been engaged in this practice of the practicing attorney for 20 years or so. And I have been mainly a corporate lawyer, giving advice to the listed and the rich people. And that's by nature of our profession, it's all confidential. So, and I learned some about the actual practice of law, such as shareholders meeting and other deals. So maybe if in the fiction I could write about them as a novel. Of course, I cannot write what I experienced and I learned, but I can use those experiences as a basis material for my novel. Then I can speak to the public in general. And that's what I thought of at the age of 47. And moreover, I had one thing that has been my conviction. That is, writing a legal brief and writing novels are the same in the sense that they are prose. They are prose in the field of literature compared with the poems. And of course, I'm not a poet and I cannot write poetry, but maybe I can write a novel because I've written many legal briefs for 20 years or so. That's what I thought. And then how could I do it? Because we may talk about it a bit more afterwards, but I had time because I did not have habit of playing golf on Sunday and Saturday. So that's why I had rather the free Sunday and the free Saturday, half of Saturday. So I had time, and that I think is the reason I could write. But the most interesting part is because while as a trusting attorney giving advice to the client companies on how the shareholders meeting be processed, as a lawyer, some ceremonial aspect is hidden behind the law. And that is, in Japan at that time, I'm talking about around the 2-3 years before the change of the century. At that time, although the bubble has bursted in Japan already, but the economy and the business world continued. This is because the collapse of the big bank or the bankruptcy of the big securities firm. So the tradition is that the shareholders meeting is conducted by the CEO of the company, and the authority of that CEO who owns, as if he owned the majority of the voting right. But legally he could not. And how did he do it? Is because he has through the mutual shareholding, namely company A owns company B's stock, and company B's instead they own the company A's stock. And between the CEOs, they shook hands and, okay, you, the company A, you exercise company B stock, my stock, in the way that we ask you to vote. And that is how the mutual shareholding worked at that time. But as being the CEO of the company, he cannot be a agent. Therefore, the CEO appointed a certain administration manager or the deputy administration manager level, middle level person to be his agent, to be the agent of the big stockholder who holds stock in behalf of the CEO or the company. That has been the traditional way of Japanese shareholders meeting system since 1950, around 1950. And that means that at the time of the shareholders meeting, on the spot, that agent owns more than majority of the stock. So then the fiction starts. What if that middle level person thinks that, oh, this president or that this CEO is not good? I can manage it better.
Yeah.
So he did.
It's a great idea, and it takes everyone by surprise. And it's a great setup because the lower level employee that you put in charge was given his notice that he was going to lose his job right just before the meeting. And then he, instead of losing his job, he takes over the company.
Yes, because why he loses his job is because of the burst of bubble.
Right.
And the banks went collapse, so they had to shrink. And this shrinkage, the bubble and the burst of bubble is a big elements of this novel. Because of that, then the top people stuck to the traditional way of doing things, as in the shareholders meeting. But on the other hand, as George, you said that that middle level person was facing the termination of the job. But the CEO, thought that he could expect the loyalty of that person.
Yeah. And I think it probably was a big hit in Japan because somebody stepped out of what he was told to do and instead took over the company.
Right. Of course, it could happen because it is a fiction in the area of novel. But legally speaking, it was possible, and it was a big shock to the Japanese top business people at that time.
Yeah. Have you ever heard from anyone who read your novel back then that they said, well, we're going to start doing things differently because we don't want this to happen?
Not a specific top person said so to me, but after that, it's a common sense that the proxy need to be rewritten and the procedure of the shareholders meeting should be changed. And that had a real effect because from next year on, the Japanese company has to have every 1 year shareholders meeting. And the term of a director during those days was only 2 years. So in order to have the renewal or to be appointed as again as the director, that is a prerequisite to be appointed as a CEO. You have to immediately introduce the system, new system.
Yeah, that's just a great way of taking your legal work and turning it into a very interesting novel. I thought that was great. So we'll come back to your other writing later, but I think, you're in such a great position to give a different viewpoint on what's going on for Americans, because you were born just a little bit after World War II in Japan. And we have this history between the United States and Japan, which of course includes the big war of World War II. But the two countries have been working together very well for many, many decades. And that should be surprising given the history of World War II. So why don't, from a Japanese point of view, why don't you talk about the history between America and the United States and Japan, going back to say the 1850s with Commodore Perry, and how this worked out?
Commodore Perry. Then it was 1853. He visited Japan, and he visited Japan with the 4 vessels, all painted black. So we in Japanese at that time called four black vessels, and that pushed open our door. And then after the 13 or 14 years, we started the Meiji Revolution. And Meiji Revolution for us is the start of the modernization and industrialization. And thanks to that, I think, Japan caught up with, and that timing was very good because France had to withdraw from the Asian power because of they lost against Germany in the year of 1870 or so, or 71, and then you had the Civil War. So Britain during those days were the only one big power active in Japan, and we learned a lot from the Britain and especially Japanese Navy. But our system, Meiji Emperor is admired the British system because Britain has the king and we had the emperor. So in that sense it's similar. And since then we started the industrializing or the modernizing, and with a lot of assistance, especially financial assistance and technical assistance from abroad, from developed countries, and of course including your country, the United States. We were successful, even so successful as to win the Russo-Japanese War in the year 1907. We won, of course, because of the big financial help. We could not fight without that financial help, but we won. And that is a turning point for us. Because World War I was not a big issue for us because it's mainly fought in Europe. So we thought around that time, we are one of the 5 biggest power, only next to the US, Britain, France, Germany, and us. And of course, you may count Italy. Then in Japan, we are one of the competitors with the developed countries such as Britain, the United States, France, and the Germany was lost the war, so the Germany was not counted at that time. But so why don't we go to China and invade China? Of course, at that time they did not use that word, invade China, and try to be much bigger and bigger. Let's try to have more power. And But the China, of course, should be an independent country, and I think the United States was very clear in that sense. China should not be under any country of the imperialism. But we were one of the imperialistic countries at that time, and the more we go deep in China, then we were counter-attacked, of course, by the Chinese army, supported by Britain. And then we reached the point that next point is, do we continue fighting in China? If we continue fighting, then we have to fight eventually with Britain and the United States. And of course, Holland and some other countries, but mainly the United States and Britain. Do we do it, or should we not? And because of the success or the victory experience in Japan, Japanese army as well as Japanese public opinion were for the continuation of the fight in China. Therefore, then we were sanctioned by the United States as well as Britain, but mainly by the United States. Then we seriously faced the situation whether we withdraw from China or not to withdraw. That will mean that we have to start fighting against the United States. And we made a horrible decision at that time. That means that the attack, Pearl Harbor, that was horrible, and I think the stupid decision, but the decision was made and done, and that is the start of the war. But it continued 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
On the top of the war against China, which started 1937,
mm-hmm.
2 fronts, and eventually we lost, as you know. Then we were occupied by the Allied forces, but mainly by the United States. And we are very happy not to be occupied by the Soviet Union at that time. If we are occupied by the Soviet Union, then we must go through the experiences of the East European countries. Maybe mm-hmm. we are independent already now, but it must have taken a quite different course. Maybe we were like Czechoslovakia, for example.
Yeah.
But in any event, then now we start. We are in the year of 1945. And that relates to my novel, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
But, before that, let me talk about the development from the ruins, real ruins of Japan. But happily, we had as occupying forces the U.S. Army and Navy. Then the United States assisted us financially and all with food first. We were almost starving, but with food and finance and techniques. And that is and we had a good level of the industry potentially, and we did have some. So we had the basis, and the combination of those led us to a rapid growth of economy, which started in the year of 1960. I was 11. Mm-hmm. So my life is parallel with the rapid growth of Japan. Then eventual result is the 1985. We reached the stage, at such stage as was called Japan as number one. Mm-hmm. You may remember this phrase, Japan as number one.
Yeah.
And that was the peak of our positioning vis-a-vis the US. United States must have thought, I presume thought that, okay, Japan, yes, you were You've been a good boy, and now you are the adult, and you are matured now. So let's deal with you as an equal partnership. And so did the Prime Minister Kishi, who agreed to change the securities agreement, mutual securities agreement in the year 1960. And so we were going the rather good way, but we have grown too much, maybe. And we reached the point, and we have to renegotiate. But the important point is that after we lost the war, our military force is very limited. And we have self-defense forces, but nuclear weapon, we rely totally upon the United States. And we are now yet, and in the future, we will continue to rely on the United States because we are good allies. And that is the positioning of Japan at the time that we reached the days of the Japan as #1. So when we renegotiate, then we have to concede, and we conceded some. And some call it it was like old Greek historian said, the Thucydides trap.
Yeah.
I don't know if Japan was that big, but in any event, we had to rearrange our relationship. And the one big factor is that we totally rely on your nuclear weapon. And that is one of the reasons that we have to, even with some concession on our part. That is a negotiation during the we started around the 1990. And but we had to reach, and we reached a good relationship again, and that is where we are now.
Yeah, you made a very interesting comment the other day when we were talking about nuclear weapons and why you think Japan will not want to have nuclear weapons because of your situation, the island situation. And I think we were discussing that in context with North Korea. So why don't we talk a little bit about North Korea and the threat that it has, and how you analyze why North Korea is doing what it's doing.
North Korea, may I? North Korea is doing what they are doing. You mean that why do they develop the nuclear weapon? That I understand is because they want to keep independence. Of course, that also relates, or closely relates to the Kim dynasty. But basically, it is the matter of independence of North Korea. So, in the future, if your country, I think the United States is the only one country who can persuade the North Korea that you don't need to have a nuclear weapon. We assure you that you will continue to be the independent country. And when I talk about independence of North Korea, I'm talking about independence of North Korea from China. If it is I think to the North Korea a matter of course that if they don't have a nuclear weapon, then they cannot deal with the China in their favor. That should be difficult.
It's an interesting angle from, I don't think we think about it from that point of view. You're saying that the North Koreans keep the nuclear weapons, not so much to threaten Japan and the United States, but to keep themselves independent of China's control.
Yes, my thinking, my understanding is that, of course, that is a big threat to us.
Yeah,
of course, and it could be a threat to your country, even to the United States, if they have a good, well-developed missiles.
Right.
But one of the biggest and the main motivation of North Korea is to keep the independence from other part of world, emphasis on China. Don't forget, China and North Korea are the neighbors.
I think it would be helpful. We don't have to spend 500 years doing this, but I think it would be helpful for people to understand why China has the Koreans and the Japanese and the Vietnamese and other Asian civilizations that are right by it concerned. If we go back 50 years, China was so full of their own internal problems that people didn't worry about them too much. But the situation is no longer the same. So even though China hasn't seemed to be militarily interested in very much outside of Taiwan and Hong Kong and Macau, the parts of former China, but still their neighbors are all nervous. Why don't you talk about that?
Then talking about China, I think we should come back to the year of 1840.
Okay.
That is the year of the Nanking Agreement. By then, China have thought that we are the biggest and the strongest country. Or some says about the Britain and some says about the France. So what? Qing dynasty at that time. It is from Manchuria, but the Chinese people who are under that Qing dynasty. And they thought Qing dynasty, the three great emperors and the Qing dynasty took it for granted that we are the biggest and we are the strongest and we are the best and the country which should be most respected. And that is shown in the history of the Britain and China diplomatic relationship. At first, the Britain had to beg China to start the trade long before. But China suddenly was shown the truth of the meaning of the Industrial Revolution. China lost war because of the steamship, and they could not win the small number of the British Navy and some part of army. They are mainly from India because India was a part of Britain at that time. Therefore, for China, deep in their mind, China should be the great China. And just returning back to the Qing dynasty, that is my basic understanding of the Chinese people deep in their mind.
And the Japanese, just for those who aren't familiar with the history, the Japanese developed their industry, as you were saying earlier, way prior to the time China did. China did not adapt to that, but the Japanese were the first Asian civilization to adapt to the Industrial Revolution and did it very quickly. So we're watching China do it in the last 40 years, and do it very well. So, but that at the time in the 19th century, that wasn't true. So it was a shock to China, as you say. But prior to that, China always used its influence on its neighbors. And not always in a way that made them feel comfortable.
Yes, but Japan has been an exception because Japan kept independence from China for a long time, from the beginning, and China has never occupied Japan, or China made a subordinate to their country. Japan has not been subject to China at any time. So
it's interesting because that takes us much further back. Yes. But maybe people aren't familiar with that background too. Is that Japan, with its own civilization in say 700, 800 AD, so going back 1300 years, something like that, then got the influence of Buddhist thought and some other Chinese ideas, and that was incorporated into the Japanese civilization, and that kind of gave Japan its own flavor. But as you said, the Chinese never actually occupied Japan.
Right. They tried to around the year of in the 12th century, but that only one trial and they failed. And because of the sea between China and Japan, so the Japan could successfully and happily and successfully could keep independence from China.
All right. So we covered a lot of history that may give people a perspective on what's going on now. So let's talk about the virus crisis. We have something that came from, at least seems to have come from China first. how has that influenced people's attitudes towards China, or is it just considered an accident and not really a Chinese issue?
You mean the COVID-19 and the China and the
just from an emotional point of view,
yes.
The fact that this COVID-19 virus came from China,
Yes.
has it made people more uncomfortable with China, or do people consider that an accident? You know, it's just a virus, it's just an accident.
The first, I think, not uncomfortable with their attitude. But China reportedly successfully recovered from the COVID-19, and we are yet trying to recover. So talking about China vis-a-vis the COVID-19, then I think the economic side is very important. But talking about the origin of that virus, then we know that came from China, and that spread around Europe and the America and other part of the world. But for us, Japan, the effect is rather limited. Of course, we are in the third wave, but the one figure different. We are rather safer, comparatively safer than the people in the United States and the people in the Western Europe, or Europe entirely. So we do not seriously think that China is the cause of that virus. We know that, but we do not generally, Japanese people do not generally criticize them for that reason. Some, of course, do, but not a big weight of criticism. No, I do not think so.
Yeah. And do you have any insights into why Japan seems to be handling this difficult virus, especially because Japan is a large population on a small island, so there's a lot more in a very urban civilization, which is where usually the hot spots of the virus are. But what parts of Japanese culture or the Japanese government's reaction has helped keep the virus crisis down? It's not zero or anything like that. It's a problem, but it's not anywhere near the size problem it is in other countries. So how did you accomplish that?
Don't forget, I'm a lawyer. I'm not a doctor. But
yes, you're not in government. Yes, exactly.
But I think that because of the traditional tendency to keep ourselves very clean, often use the bath, and it's not the first time we use masks everywhere. But when we have cold, it's the customary to wear mask. And for us, for you Westerners, I understand that you do not have the custom to use in your daily life wear mask. But for us Japanese, we wear mask when we have a cold, for example, some fever. So that I presume worked. And the Japanese people's way of life to keep ourselves clean, also assisted. And some other element, and the Nobel Prize, Mr. Dr. Yamanaka says that the factor X, of course, I don't know, but I think the way of life of Japan has contributed a lot to keep us at a lower level. But the East Asia, basically, Vietnam and some other countries, Korea has a lower level compared with the United States and Europe. So that may be some other reason. But talking about Japan, then the symbol is mask.
Yeah, the symbol mask. I mean, another thing that people often don't discuss about how it spread and where it spread is that a lot of that has to do with how much international travel takes place to those other countries, and how many people are coming and going from all kinds of other countries. And although there's, of course, a lot of international travel in Japan as well, and business that goes back and forth, it's not quite as busy a hub as London or Paris or New York, right?
And Kyoto,
except for Kyoto, yes.
All the city of Japan, the former capital, is almost dead.
Yeah, Well,
because the Kyoto heavily relied on the tourists from China and other part of the world, and the Kyoto was very crowded. It's gone.
yeah. Well, you may not know this, but in pop music, the Grammy Awards are coming up for giving out the best records, and one of the top songs that's up for it is called Kyoto by a young woman named Phoebe Bridgers. She sort of became a star this year, and that's her top song, and it's about Kyoto. So.
Oh, I didn't know. Thank you very much.
Yeah. So a lot of your work as a corporate lawyer, you've been advising companies on how to do it. In your novel, you sort of advised them about the shareholders meeting, but you directly talk about minority shareholder rights, and you've written a book on minority shareholder rights. We have the same issue everywhere there are corporations, that the majority seems to not really pay that much attention to the minority in terms of what would be good for the minority, what would be fair for the minority. It's interesting that, to me, that this mirrors our social customs, which is that majority cultures often ignore the desires of minority cultures that live in it. But here we're talking just about business and about money, and yet the minority shareholders don't often get a fair case. So how has that changed? You wrote this a few years ago. What's going on for shifting Japanese business towards a fair shake for minority shareholders?
Then it's changing, improving, I dare say, improving. Mm-hmm. Because in the old days, minority shareholders has been disregarded, and stock market is not the place for the general good people to invest, because it is like a gamble. People thought long before. It's mm-hmm. changed, and it's changing and improving. But the protection of minority shareholders has been disregarded under Japanese law. We do not have the law or the legal provision which controls the majority shareholders' way of behavior. For example, it should be a matter of course for you people in the U.S., the lawyers, that controlling shareholders are also obligated to pay due attention to the minority shareholders' right. Mm-hmm. It's not established yet. We are in the process, and I'm a part of the lawyers who is trying to establish that principle. For example, the minority shareholders, because of the new development of Japanese law, minority shareholders can be squeezed out if the majority owns the more than 2/3. Then what should be the pricing, and what is the mechanism whereby the minority shareholders can assert their belief of the fair price? And then whether it should go through the TOB or some other mechanism. But we recently have a very interesting cases, not court cases, but two acquisitions. May I go ahead?
Yeah.
Go on, Sama?
Please.
One is the NTT, Nippon Telephone and Telegraph, Japanese AT&T in the old days. Once was government owned, and which is yet NTT is owned by more than 1/3 by the government. And NTT has its subsidiary mobile company called NTT Docomo. Mm-hmm. And NTT just recently announced that they acquired entire stock, all stock of the subsidiary NTT Docomo. They long had almost 2/3 of the stock of its subsidiary NTT Docomo, but they recently announced. And the interesting part is the pricing. They first said the one stock for 3,400 yen. But because of the independent committee's opinion, they amended the price to 3,900, increased the price.
Right.
And that is a very big, good improvement for the protection of Japanese minority shareholders. This is one. And don't forget that the NTT is more than 1/3 owned by the Japanese government. So this may mean, and people say that this would mean that Japanese government is not pro parent-child co-listing. Namely, the parent and the child are listed at the same time on the same stock exchange, same stock market. That is popular in Japan. More than 300 out of the 3,700 listed companies are the parent-child relationship.
Yes.
And that is, I understand, is exception in your country.
Yeah, it's an interesting phenomenon that people aren't that familiar with. All the international corporations too, even outside of Japan, where they have different subsidiaries in other countries, because they have control over those companies, they can arrange the finances. And there's nothing illegal about this. They can arrange the finances so that the profits are more in one country than another country for whatever reason they want, for either for tax reasons or anything. It's not difficult. It's just a matter of how much you finance versus how much capital you use versus how much debt you use. And so anything that increases the interest in debt has really caused a large number of the corporations to go far more into debt than they did in the 1960s and 70s, because it's an advantage. It's a tax advantage and it's a pricing advantage. And I don't think people realize.
For example, yeah.
It makes a big difference in why corporations make the choice. A lot of people think that corporations are run by nefarious people who are out to cheat everybody, when basically, like most other situations, a certain number of incentives in the law are put in place, and then the leadership of the corporation follows those incentives. And in time, over time, it changes the way things are done. Like in the United States, that people don't manufacture as much here anymore, for example. So you see your influence on the minority shareholder situation in Japan as well. That's very interesting. Have any of the minority shareholders, after you wrote about it and had that influence, did they come to you as a lawyer and say, can you represent me?
One example. Let me cite the second, another example that is also just recently happened. There is a company called Korakuen Stadium, but that is famous for its franchise of the Giants. The most popular baseball team in Japan is called Giants. And Giants, the franchise, the stadium is called Korakuen. The name itself is not important, but a company who has that stadium was threatened, warned by its minority shareholder from overseas that you should discontinue this business and you should invest more in this business. It has less than 10%, between 9 to 10% only, but they so said. Then the ISS, the advisory company, and Glass Steagall both agreed. Both said that expressed the affirmative opinion, and they are very influential upon the institutional investors. Institutional investors are bound by the stewardship code, as you know. So the institutional investors has to invest for the benefit of, not for themselves, but for the benefit of their beneficiaries, who are the real beneficiary, and the institutional investors are basically for the sake of the pension fund, simply speaking. Therefore, they sometimes are obliged, not obliged, but they sometimes tend to vote according to the recommendation by those ISS and the Glass-Steagall type company. Therefore, only 9%, 9 to 10% shareholders' voice moved the management, because that 9 to 10% shareholders said, if you don't do as we proposed, we will propose to terminate you at the shareholders meeting. Then what do you think happened? Then the next action that board or that company, the stadium, baseball stadium company took is they rushed to the Mitsui Fudosan, Mitsui and real estate company. That is the biggest Japanese real estate company. And the stadium company asked the biggest real estate company to be the White Knight. And the biggest real estate company agreed. And this is partially because that biggest the real estate company itself, of course listed Mitsui Fudosan, Mitsui Real Estate, is owned by the foreign investor by majority. So majority of the Mitsui Fudosan owner is the foreign investors. So when they were requested by the stadium company to be a White Knight, they must have the board meeting, and in the board meeting, they must have thought, what is the best interest of of course, medium, long term, of our shareholders? Who are the institutional investors and who are the investors from abroad? So in that sense, that a corporate governance or the corporate style, management style is changing, and change is taking place in those days, rapidly in those days. Next year, we will have more similar cases.
It's very interesting because obviously there has been international investment in Japan for a long time, and that's happened in a lot of other countries as well. And it does influence over time the behavior and even the behavior of the government in political senses when there's this international element involved. And I think a lot of people who think these international corporations are ruining everything don't realize that they are like a balance of power with the local way of doing things, and also with the governments and how they're doing it. It's not all international bribery and so on. It's influenced because of how people have done things in other places. We met 22 years ago when the Aoba transaction was taking place, and that was at the end of the 90s, when the life insurance companies in Japan were in trouble because of the investments. They weren't in trouble, but their balance sheet wasn't looking so good because of the investment, and they had promised to pay out 3% on their life insurance policy, something like that. What was interesting was that you were the Japanese lawyer, and we were a couple of American lawyers. Bill Marcoux was working with us on it, in charge of the project from the United States. And we had Jean-Claude Demerval and Gilles Eriolan representing Groupe Artemis, which is a French company owned by the Pinault family. Just one thing about the Pinault family, I don't know if you noticed, but when Notre Dame, the cathedral burned, the son of Pinault that we worked for, he stepped in and offered $100 million to help repair it right away. So it's that family. So we worked on this, and it was the first acquisition of a large Japanese company by a foreign company. Right? That was one of the precedents that said it was being bought by a French company. But the interesting part of it that I think people, the habit in Japan that was so interesting to everybody else was that all of the insurance companies were in an association. And because one failed, all the other companies had to pay in to help make sure that the company didn't fail. In the United States, the example would be if MetLife and New York Life and some of the other big insurance companies, if Prudential insurance was starting to fail, that they would have to give money to Prudential to make sure that it didn't fail. It sounds very un-American. And so I was sort of curious. So that worked out. It was an interesting, a very interesting transaction, and made many of us lifelong friends. But in addition to that, how has that influenced what's going on in Japan? Are there more companies owned? You're talking about minority shareholders that are foreign. Are there more companies that are owned by foreign companies now, or has that always stayed small?
The more companies are owned more by foreign companies or foreign investors, no doubt about that. And talking about AOBA, or the life insurance company, that has been tightly controlled in the old days by the FSA, Financial Agency, or at that time, Ministry of Finance. And that is a kind of just a operational branch of the MOF, or the Ministry of Finance, people said in those days. But that was the result of the natural development of the Japan after the World War II. After the World War II, I said that thanks to the U.S. assistance and aid, and of course you invested for the profit, but we welcome the investment and we welcome the technical assistance, and we have successfully grown to the extent of the Japan as #1 state. But at that time, we have to stop at least exporting as much number of cars to your country. Then what happened is the bubble here in Japan. And the bubble means that the enormous growth of the price, increase of the price of land, real estate here in Japan. And that is the big wave to in which the former NISA, which was the change to the AOBA Life, but life insurance companies, invested or speculated in the area of not only the Japanese real estate, because to those who are accustomed to the Japanese and high price of the Japanese real estate at that time, the foreign real estates and foreign assets looked very inexpensive. So they rushed to invest. So you remember that the Japanese, one of the biggest real estate company bought Rockefeller Center. And some bought Empire State Building, and some bought Columbia Pictures. In those days, but natural result was that it burst. It burst because its economy. So that is the start of the rehabilitation, so to say, of the Japanese economy, and in the year of 97, 98. By the way, the 97 is the year I wrote that number, but also the year you started working.
Yes.
Here in Japan. And in 98, we successfully reached the M&A agreement. But that is the restart of the Japanese economy after the burst. And the burst means that banks lost their power, and the government or the bureaucrats lost power. Of course, it took years, not immediately. But now we are improving, I say, because the old Japanese system, led by the bureaucrats and the government, is fading away, and we are now becoming more the liberalized economic system. And although we do not have, for example, the confinement or of the controlling shareholders' behavior, but we are in the process, and how to protect the minority shareholders fairly. Those things are now in front of us, and we are in that sense, we are developing again from the time of from the long lost 30 years. You may not know the word lost 30 years, but at first we said, after the burst of bubble around the year of 91, we said lost 10 years. And Koizumi came, but we continued losing. And then we lost 30 years. Lost, I mean, Europe GDP or the non-Japanese developed companies GDP hiked.
Right.
Stock price jumped as flat. Comparatively, we occupied the 16% of the entire world GDP in the year of 88. Now we have 7%.
Yeah. Now, I think it's interesting, and we're going to go to another big issue here in Asia, because I think a lot of people who follow Japan and what Japan did, and as you said, in the late 80s, it was like, oh, is Japan going to take over the whole world? Because they just bought the Rockefeller Center and the Pebble Beach golf course and so on, and didn't realize that was because the investments in Japan weren't producing enough response, et cetera. There's a lot of reasons for it. But I'd like you to compare that to China, because some people say, well, if we give China enough time and they develop slowly, or not, they're not developing slowly, but if they keep developing, that their one-party political system will eventually lead to more, liberalization and more openness. They're obviously very interested in the economic growth, but Japan wasn't a communist government in charge ever, but it was a very influential bureaucracy. And, we can't really count the bureaucracy in China as communist anymore. They may call themselves that, but they don't really behave that way. So do you see parallels? Do you think that people, because right now the United States is facing a big issue about China. Do we consider China to be another Japan that will keep growing, and over time, as the economy keeps growing, that they will liberalize and become, less of a bloc government and more of a more open society? Or are they going to just get all that power and have it all in the hands of a few people that run the whole country? So do you see parallels, or do you see contrasts, or both?
With the hope that you are correct in expecting a modern free China, but my answer as of today is no. Japan and China are differently positioned. Let me refer back to the leaders, Trump. When we reached Japan as #1 stage around the year of the 80 or the late 80, we were totally, again, relying upon you for security, national security. China, look at China. They are independent. They have their own nuclear weapons. So I do not think that you can expect a good solution we, Japan and the United States, reached late 20th century, last part of the 20th century. I do not think you can. And that is a big concern to us Japanese, a country we are located between China and the United States.
Yes.
So we do hope that China will be liberalized as we are, but that would not happen. And if that doesn't happen, then what happens between China and the United States? Within 10 years, you may fight. And if you two fight, what would happen to us, Japan? That is a big concern of ours at Japan as a country. But therefore, we do hope that you can have a good, successful solution to change China and then China to become a country of democracy and liberty. But I cannot be optimistic.
Yeah. So if you were put on your most optimistic hat and said, what should Japan and the United States do? Say, use North Korea as a way of getting to China and saying, we are going to, as you said earlier, we're going to give North Korea confidence that they can stay independent from China. And how are we going to convince China that that's a good idea?
You may not succeed to convince China, but meanwhile, you can convince North Korea that a guarantee by the United States is good enough to give up or to forget the nuclear weapon. And that will automatically mean that North Korea will suddenly have a good, rapid growth of economy. And in that sense, China will start respecting North Korea, because then North Korea is between China and the United States not as a poor country having a nuclear weapon, but a prosperous company without nuclear weapon. And that is, I think, within our circle. That is the not democracy as such, but at least neutral vis-a-vis the China-US relationship, rather on the side of the US, because if the North Korea is open for the foreign investment, then the US will go and we will go.
Yeah, I was just going to say, do you think that Japan would invest in North Korea along with the United States in order to produce that economy over a 20 or 30-year period?
Yes.
Yeah, that would be the best. That would be the best foreign policy that we could all do for North Korea.
Yes, but only the U.S. can make it happen.
Only the U.S. can lead it. Yeah. I hope that President-elect Biden just heard that conversation.
Thank you.
And that's a great way to end another event of the Commonwealth Club. Thank you very much for joining us from the future in Tokyo the next day. And it was a wonderful conversation with you, Shin. And so ends another event of the Commonwealth Club in its 118th year of enlightened discussion. Thank you very much for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you, George. Thank you very much for giving me a chance. Thank you.
Yeah.